Hey, MBA hopefuls, we are on the air with MBA Waves, your weekly vidcast talking all things business and education, streaming live every Tuesday on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. We bring you tons of tips to help you get into top-ranked MBA programs, and we got loads of great guests, and each week a different theme that we're going to dive into. And this week's episode, we're going to learn what makes for a non-traditional profile, how you can turn your perceived weaknesses into a strength, and steps that you can take if you see yourself as a non-traditional candidate for successful admission into an MBA, if that is indeed the best adapted program for you. This week is episode 107, and we're talking with Laura E. Nelson, founder of L.E. Nelson Consulting, and she is joining us from Colorado on this July 4th, big holiday here in the United States. She comes from a marketing background, and so she definitely knows how to promote and sell, and she's the founder of her consulting firm since 2008, so she brings loads of experience. Thanks for joining us, Laura.
Thank you guys for having me. Really happy to be here.
Yes. And don't forget, if you're listening today, if you like this week's episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll get Laura to introduce herself a little bit, and then we'll jump right into the conversation. Laura, why don't you say hello?
Sure. My name is Laura Nelson. And the reason I'm passionate about this topic is because I have a non-traditional background myself. So in undergrad, I went to Carnegie Mellon University, where I was a fine art major. Not a lot of us make our way to business school. But I found my way to business school after a few years in the entertainment industry, landed at Ross School of Business, University of Michigan in the full-time MBA program. Following that, I found a career in tech marketing, where I had general management and marketing roles for over a decade and have been consulting alongside that as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Laura. And Michigan Ross is one of the top MBA programs that we often get to know, especially through AGAC, our common association, right? That's how we know each other. And speaking of knowing each other, my two fellow hosts on the show, Bara and Krithika, how you guys doing today?
Awesome. I'm doing great. I'm so excited about this because I don't know if the viewers know, but I also have a fine arts background as well. So I happen to have seen Laura's fine art, which is exquisite. So really? It's been, yeah. And we both went to Michigan at different times, but like, it's so exciting because being an artist, you really bring a lot to everything that you do. And so I have no doubt that all of this marketing and all this other education that Laura's had is also fueled by this sense of the artistic and seeing the world in a very unique way. So I'm really excited about this conversation today.
100%. I mean, like the backgrounds that we've chosen to study and focus on, it definitely shapes how we see the world, and we can usually add that, or that can contribute to how we do the work that we do today. Coming from a creative background like the two of you, I'm sure that helps you come up with creative ways, or maybe more artistic or poetic ways to help your clients. In the case of Laura, and for Bara in test prep as well. Me, I come from a science background, and I've never actually worked as a scientist, but I definitely am able to apply things I learned, like a scientific method, as an approach to admissions as well. Krithika, I know you're having some internet issues today over in India. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I think I'm going to be an outlier with a typical engineer in the house. But I think Bara, Laura, and I share the Go Blue connection.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. We sure do. We sure do. So I'm going to dive in.
Yeah, do it.
Go ahead. Okay. So I'm going to dive in because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about coming in as a creative. And so I wanted to hear from you, what are some of the common misconceptions about MBAs held by non-traditional candidates?
Sure. I think I work with a lot of non-traditional candidates. I seem to, attract that profile just because of my background. So I hear a lot of this initial hesitation where candidates come in and say, hey, isn't business school for business people? And they don't truly understand what the options are for someone like them, or that, it can be a mechanism to pivot one's career. So I hear that often, right? And alongside that, candidates are thinking that, they must have a business degree or a business job coming into the program. Additionally, something that I hear a lot is that, people have a perception that you have to have a business or management type role going into the program, when in fact, a number of people outside of, management responsibilities can find their way to top programs and be successful. I'd be curious to hear what you guys have to add on to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Kritika, do you want to contribute first?
Sure. I would say that the non-traditional students that I applied to, I was able to connect with them a lot more than the typical engineers. I think it's just because who they are and probably how they relate to the world. It's just different between probably the poets and quants, if you want to use that kind of distinction here. The one thing that stands out for me when I work with non-traditional applicants is their I would say it's more like their resilience and their goal to get into business school. It's often tied to like saying that, hey, I tried doing all these things in the social space, didn't work out, I need a business degree to make this place better. So that's what they think. And they always have like I'm not saying the others don't, but the most of the candidates that I work with, they always have like an overarching goal to why they're doing business school, and that to me just makes them closer to me. I feel more fulfilled when I work with them, right?
I definitely agree with what Kritika is saying there. I mean, coming from somebody who was a recruiter for one of the top business schools here in France, there in France, because I'm in the US today, right? I was seeing numbers typically like 30 or so% of the people coming in had a traditional business background, right? They're coming from finance, consulting, marketing, accounting. And maybe there was like 5% that were like in the entrepreneurial space or family businesses, but the rest were people from more technical backgrounds where there are engineers, but also like lawyers, doctors. And you hear about those kind of like classical unique profiles, let's say like the dancer or the teacher or some of those people. And it's really interesting. I mean, and I really love those that came to the table and they kind of had the business degree later on in their career in mind from the beginning. A lot of them were like, okay, I know I want to do this. So what I'm going to do first is have an engineering degree or whatever. Or for the dancer, they know that the dancer's career is probably 10 or 15 years just because your body can only take so many pirouettes or whatever you're doing. So they know that like if they line themselves up properly, they can do this. And there are loads of other people who haven't had that foresight, right, to really do that kind of planning. And while that may put you a little bit more of you're not as advanced in your planning, you definitely can recover and make up for that, especially if you're working with a coach who knows this process and can really help you along the way. And I'm not sure if Farah, if you have anything to add to that based on your deal is like you're in the test prep space, but.
Well, I'm thinking, I definitely, we're working with someone right now who's actually in sort of the film space. He comes from an acting background, so it's really interesting talking to him about his goals. But I'm just thinking a lot about how the leadership skills that students are going to get in business school are just useful really for anyone at any time. And when I think of my friends who are artists, there's definitely a spectrum of different types of artists. Some can be like the very intense, not necessarily very social kind. And then there's ones that really are successful, not because their art is the best in the world, but because they're able to have that business acumen and ability to communicate with people. So it feels to me like a business degree is such a valuable tool for all types of creatives because it really will advance their leadership and creative endeavors, even if it's in different fields, like you were talking about the dancer, right? Like it really allows them to take their art and be able to be a leader beyond just their own craft. It really gives that possibility. That's really what I've always thought of it. I've always been super excited, especially at AGAC, when we have all the different case studies and do them. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. Maybe I should go to business school, but right. I couldn't go to business school right now. But.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. And not only in the creative space, but people who are working as an engineer or already in finance, I always say to people, like young professionals, it's not enough to be good at what you do. It's important to be good at communicating about your successes and building relationships. So there's all that soft skill stuff that's super important that gets really next level and beyond in business school, especially in an MBA program.
I found that served me really well, the communication piece because, having gone to art school, and Bara can probably relate to this, you're creating new work all the time at a rapid pace, and you are in critiques each and every week of the curriculum. So you build that muscle as a creative, and you're constantly discussing your thought process and then the output with your work. And that's where, some creatives and non-traditional applicants can really have a leg up and come in with those skills really fleshed out.
Kritika, did you want to take away with the next question?
Sure. So I know that Eric, you touched upon it a little bit. What is the makeup of the MBA cohort, and what does that tell us about, the non-traditional applicants and your place in the cohort?
Yeah, really help candidates review the class profiles of their target programs. Like, this is really where they can understand and parse through and, demystify who's in that class, right? That's a big part of my process with clients is, helping them understand what the class profile says and where there's a place for them in that program. So, for example, when you look at the class profile of Booth, half of the class doesn't have a business or an econ degree. So what that tells me, with my client, for example, I'm working with someone right now who comes from a social work background, that it tells me that Booth, half of the makeup of the class is coming from somewhere else, has a makeup of something like her, even if it's not exactly social work, right? So that's what I really, review in tandem, and also just really encourage candidates to do is, look underneath the hood and look at where those candidates are coming from. And there's a wealth of information in the class profiles. And of course, you're going to see a variance, across the top programs. Some might lean a little more heavily in the business or econ backgrounds, but I think the common theme across a lot of them is that, there is a wealth of non-business backgrounds, across the cohort as well.
Absolutely. So, Laura, tell me, how should non-traditional candidates think about their narratives when they're applying for school?
I think in my experience, really honing in on where business school fits into that career arc is critical. And you probably have found this in your own experiences as well, too, right? Someone identifies business school as a stepping stone to the next stage of their career, and working very closely with them to understand, what they're hoping to get out of that and how that leads them, to the place they want to go. In other words, how business school is the bridge to that future is critical. That's something that I work on early on with all my non-traditional candidates is, building that narrative and helping them understand how to articulate that, both verbally as we're talking now, right? What's that elevator pitch? How does that come across in an interview? Mm-hmm. And then translating that to the application materials themselves, too. As you guys have probably noticed, and as the trends have told us, a lot of programs are really honing in on the short-term goals as opposed to equal emphasis on the long-term goals and short-term goals, because a lot of the admissions committees know and the programs know that people change their minds when they come to business school. But if you have a solid plan in place and, at least an idea of how the experience can facilitate your goals, you have a much stronger chance of admission.
That is so true. People, of course, they change their plans. Life happens, right? Things come up. You meet someone, whether it's personal or it's professional. Maybe there's things like kids or illness, things that are, unplanned tragedies come up, unfortunately. But on the positive side, like, you may be exposed to a certain industry that you're like, oh, this is fantastic, I want to go this way. And that's fine. But I always tell people, again, when I was working at a business school on the recruitment side, like, you have to have a plan A and be able to articulate that in a way that is like clear and well thought out, but also that's realistic. And that's something we need to get into as well, is what is beyond realistic. But we'll come back to that in a moment. But it's fine if you don't stick to that plan A, as long as that you can demonstrate that you have one, and then people can change. So that's why what you're saying. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I'm a great example of plans going sideways. So I thought I would pursue CPG going in. I learned what CPG marketing was. And that didn't interest me after a couple of weeks into the program. About a year into the program, my dad fell sick with leukemia. I ended up taking over his role in the family business alongside finishing my study in the full-time program. He died a month before graduation. So I wasn't going off to a full-time role. I was helping my mom for a couple years, while doing a few odds and ends, and then eventually landing in, a full-time tech role. So I know that's an extreme example, but those things can certainly happen.
Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to have any kind of loss like that, but I definitely did change. When I was an undergrad, I was always interested in science. I was a biology major. I was good at it. I thought I would be doing something in medicine. It wasn't until I was in the process of applying for grad schools and I was doing those volunteer hours that I realized I couldn't handle blood. It was a total career move. So yeah, I'm way too squeamish for anything. I can't even watch ER when that was on TV. But anyways, I switched to education because of that. And it's just something I hadn't thought through enough back when I was an undergrad. What about Kritika, Bara? Do you have any career moves for your personal paths?
I'm thinking, I'm actually thinking about when the D school came about. I'm actually thinking about how, and when we were at the AGAT conference, when we were up at Columbia, and they were talking about all these hybrid programs, and even Cornell was talking about that. And so it feels like there are schools, I don't know all the schools that do it, but that schools really recognize that there's different kinds of intelligences, and maybe it's intelligence I don't know what the plural is, but that there's different ways of thinking that really lend themselves, and so many schools are looking to solve so many of the world's problems with these different hybrid models. So it's really, I would imagine, I would want to hear from you guys, it's probably a really exciting time if you're a non-traditional student to apply, because we're solving big problems. We're not just solving them through accounting and number crunching, right? We're solving them by thinking outside of the box, which non-traditional allows that. Like your social worker client that you're talking about, Laura, they're coming to it understanding these social systems and the interpersonal system simultaneously, and how that can be broached, within a business model, and how, I'm curious what their path is or how they see themselves in business school. But that's exciting because we're kind of in a mess.
Yeah. I think some of the most self-aware institutions, I would say, are trying to figure out how to solve that problem of thinking outside of the box, of going a different path to solve the world's problems, you say, when they are themselves a traditional institution, often is the case. And so how do you do that? And so I think one of the ways is, well, it's always about the people, right? And so having that diversity, different schools of thought, different countries, of course, different cultures, bring in different problem-solving techniques, different ways of communicating and so forth, but also different career backgrounds, right? Like how would a teacher or an astronaut or, I don't know, a dancer, again, for that example, solve a problem in a business situation that somebody who's just kind of, let's say, programmed, educated really is the word, in business might not come up with, because they're already in it, right? So Kritika, anything to add to that point? Or
yeah, I would say that what I love about non-traditional folks is their approach to a certain issue. It will be for example, when they start writing their essays, it'll be completely different than how an engineer would think, or how a scientist, or somebody from finance, or
resumes too, right? The CVs, same thing.
Yeah, the CVs too, and I think it's just they have such a different approach to it, which really turns the problem on its head and makes people think, oh, you could do it this way too. So it's not very surprising actually that I did have couple candidates last year who went from hardcore finance to something completely non-traditional after MBA. So it does happen. I think that's a beauty of business school. And I do know one of my non-traditional applicants who came from social work, who got into management consulting on day zero of one of the top schools in India, actually. So yeah, all kinds of things. But I would love them for the thinking process that they bring, which is what I think is so different. The way that you approach art or dance or music or even education, for the matter. I did have somebody who went to who was teaching kindergarten students. And her aim was mainly to like start this huge chain of institutions of kindergartens, right? And she wanted to go to B school for that. So
You know, I think is also worth mentioning is the fact that we've been talking about non-traditional career paths leading up to the degree, up until the MBA, but also post MBA. There's a lot of people who want to work, say, for government, or even I've seen military, I've seen NGO and not-for-profit organizations as well, taking those business skills that we prize so much to run the McKinseys of the world and using that for a government or for a not-for-profit organization as well. I would say it goes back to something like the early 2000s, 2002, 3, 4, 5. We were seeing a change in the not-for-profit world sector where they were understanding that if they wanted to compete with having top talent to run their organizations, they needed to start paying salaries commensurate to those people who were working in the private sector. So there was a massive shift in mindset, and that's good news for people who want to work in not-for-profit, right? If you are more driven to get up out of bed every morning and go to the office, if it's about taking care of something like world hunger or the arts or healthcare or something like that in the not-for-profit, that's great news if you want to have a good salary and work in that sector. So that also is part of the diversity, right? The mindset of the people who want to come out of an MBA and applying those skills, hard and soft skills, to those worlds. I worked also with somebody who was a lawyer, wanted to pivot to something more in business. He came from Peru, came to France, worked there for a little bit, and then went back to his home country, ended up working in government, was running like the Ministry of Environmental stuff in Peru for a while. So it's like amazing how he was able to apply those skills into a governmental role. Bara, I think you're up with the next question.
I am. It's my turn now. And we sort of touched on this a tiny bit, but I'm curious, what do successful non-traditional candidates do in the whole application process to really stand out? What are some tips?
A few tips I can share here is that I often get the question, what are the admissions committees looking for? Right. Especially if someone isn't, coming from a business background, they might wonder how to fit in. And I challenge them to lean into what makes them unique, to stand out. So, as many of us know, the process of admissions for business school, it's a bit of an art and a science, right? It's less conforming than, say, the med school or law school process. Like, there's a lot of leeway here, and schools really do want to build a diverse class across many dimensions. So to the extent that non-traditional candidates can lean into that unique experience and share what translates to the business career and share what makes them unique, and also importantly, share how they are going to uniquely contribute to the class, is to their advantage. So one example from my own experience is that I'm a former competitive figure skater. And when I was applying to Michigan, I wrote about how I was trying out for the synchronized skating team. And, this summer after applying, I tried out for and made the team. So in addition to attending the full-time program, I skated with a team of undergrads at the collegiate level, which was totally unique to anyone else in the class, but something that I thought would make me stand out and a little different and an asset to the class as well.
100%, especially anything that's team-based. You hear schools, admissions committees talk about all the time how if you have those skills to work in a team like soccer, baseball, basketball, hockey, and even like this figure skating team, you're working together for something in common. Those skills translate to the boardroom often, right? That kind of collaborative approach. That's fantastic. And it certainly is something that would make you stand out, right? That's, I think, what a lot of applicants don't realize is some of the things they would just discount as irrelevant for their MBA application are actually some of the things that set them apart from others. Looks like Kristika has lost internet connection, so I'm just going to jump in and ask this next question. Are there things, Laura, that you think that applicants that they should or should not do to be sure that they fit in compared to standing out a bit?
I think regardless of where you're coming from, right, you have to prove that you can fit or, meet the academic challenges of the program, right? So admissions committees are looking for the progression in your career, the leadership examples, and importantly, how you did in your undergrad experience and or master's experience following that, if you have another master's degree, in addition to your test scores, right? Those are part of the application, not the whole application, but they are indicators in how you perform in a quant and academic environment. So what I would say is, if you're a non-traditional candidate, you can't ignore these other aspects of the application, right? You have to make sure that you are checking the boxes, you're within the ranges of your target programs. Mm-hmm. And if you're not, you're doing everything that you can to offset any of those potential weaknesses, right? You're taking the test again, you're maybe trying another test that the school accepts. Maybe the GMAT's not your speed, but the GRE or the EA is. If you don't have any quant work in your undergrad, maybe you're taking that UCLA or UC Berkeley extension class and getting an A and proving that, hey, this is indicative of how I can perform currently on these types of subjects. Those are a few ideas of how non-traditional candidates can help to offset any of those perceived weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the best things you can do is talk to the admissions person and see what they're looking for, and like if they are open to the EA, for example, in place of the GMAT, but also speaking with somebody like Laura, like myself, Kritika, who is an expert in this area, to work on those areas to avoid a ding. You don't have to. A ding meaning getting rejected or having a problem with your application that you may have to wait till next year, especially if you're on the upper end of the range of admissibility for a full-time MBA program. You don't have a bunch of years that you can still apply afterwards. Reapplications are not a bad thing, I should say, though. If you are on the younger end of the spectrum and you do get a reject, while that is very disheartening, you do have the right to apply the following year. And a lot of schools, most admissions reps that I speak to really like reapplications. They really appreciate that, okay, this person's really serious about this program, so don't hesitate to do it if you end up getting that. But to your point earlier about being realistic, maybe that's something you want to expand on. Like, what do you do with somebody that you're maybe working with, or somebody who's talking about working with you, and their goal is just too far? Like, how do you coach them in that way?
Yeah, I like to help understand risk profiles of my clients, right? We all have clients who, some are just very ambitious and they're only going to apply to the top 3 or 5 schools. And if they don't, if they're not competitive at that program, I really have to work with them to understand that, you might not get an interview or you might not get into all of these programs. Are you okay with that? Because if their stance is, I must enroll next fall in a program, well, I take a more, investing type approach there and, diversify chances across reach programs, which I'm not going to discourage, right? Everyone should have a dream program and reach for it, but also be realistic about their chances and where their stats fall. Like, let's pick some programs where you are competitive, right? And if you absolutely must enroll, let's pick some programs that are on the safer side for you. But I will qualify that by saying if it's the only choice you have that you would be interested in attending. I don't want candidates to spend time on applications for schools that they're not interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more than your approach. It's really well said. Thank you. Anything to add, Laura? Or Kritika? Sorry, was that you?
I had a quick question here, Laura. Mm-hmm. Do you find that your non-traditional applicants have more difficulty with the test or any particular aspect of the application more than your traditional applicants?
I think the common perception is they might have more trouble with the test, but I haven't seen that consistently across my candidates to draw a firm conclusion. So, it really just, in my experience, has varied from candidate to candidate because, a lot of them are coming with very solid undergrad transcripts, for example, right? And solid progression in their non-traditional career before business school. So I wouldn't say there's any single prescription for, a common problem because I'm really meeting them where they are and getting very personalized to where they can improve.
Mm-hmm. And Krithika, why don't you? Oh wait, do we have some? No, Krithika, why don't you jump in with the last question there?
Sounds great. All right, to wrap up, let's hear some few tips on, especially some pointers in presenting the short-term goals.
In presenting the short-term goals, I think I would go back to thinking about business school as the bridge to the future. So you're on one side of the river, business school is the bridge. Your short-term goal is on the other side of the river. How do you articulate, what you have today, what business school provides that you need to reach that other side? So that's a simple analogy, but it is likely you as a candidate have some skills and both technical and hard skills that your short-term goal desires. It's your job as part of the process to identify what about the program can provide what you're missing, right? What's unique about this program? What skills, what experiences do you need from school X to cross that river and most effectively set yourself up for those short-term goals?
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Guys, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much, Laura, for your time today and sharing all that insight. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else you want to add? Some final advice you want to give to people who might be listening today or listening to the recordings?
Oh, my advice would be to, talk to me or someone like me who has seen a lot of these candidate profiles over the years and can give you pointers. That's not to say you have to sign up with a coach. Everyone has, different constraints and budgets and so forth. But these conversations can be very valuable. And when I was in your shoes, I availed myself of an intro call with someone at an admissions consulting firm who really encouraged me to take the test again, pushed me over 700 on the GMAT, and that made all the difference in scholarships. So, you can gain a lot from a short 15-minute conversation.
100%. Guys, we're going to wrap it up today. Thank you for joining us on MBA Waves. Today was all about demystifying MBA admissions for non-traditional candidates. Don't forget to check out the program schedule on the website, as well as all the past episodes on our YouTube channel. And if you like today's episode, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to stay in tune. You can find Laura's website at the bottom of the description for today's episode. And thank you for joining. See you next time on MBA Waves. Bye-bye.